Hello and welcome to another episode of the World War II podcast. I'm Angus Wallace. At the end of World War II, 473 men had been honoured by the United States for their bravery and sacrifice by receiving the Medal of Honor. The medal was awarded among all ranks, from Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright at the top, all the way down to 18-year-old Private Joseph Merrell. But though 1 million African Americans served in the military, not one was awarded the Medal of Honor, this being despite some extraordinary acts of valour. In 1993, a US Army Commission reviewed cases, often from recipients of America's second highest medal, the Distinguished Service Cross, and determined that a number of these men had been denied the Army's highest award simply due to racial discrimination. In this episode, I'm joined by Robert Child, author of Immortal Valor, the Black Medal of Honor winners of World War II. But before we get started, it's a big thank you to all those who support the podcast by becoming patrons. $1 or so from people like you, loyal listener, help me find the time to put the show together. You can find out more at patreon.com/WW2podcast. So, on to the main feature. Robert, thanks for joining me. Shall we start by looking at the Medal of Honor? What's its history? When was it first awarded? How did it come about? It's something I don't know much about.
The Medal of Honor was created first for the Navy, the U.S. Navy, in 1861, and it was put forth by a congressman. And Abraham Lincoln signed that bill, and then it became the Medal of Honor for the Army. So it started with the Navy first and then moved into the Army. It was intended to recognize the highest levels of bravery in combat. And it was replacing the badge of military merit, which came out at the end of the Revolution, that was created by George Washington, which later, that badge of military merit became the Purple Heart. So there was a need with the Civil War, the American Civil War, to create a medal for valor on the battlefield.
Was anyone expressly exempt? Because certainly the British Army, some of these medals go to officers and some don't go to officers. Was it a medal conceived for everybody?
It was, in the beginning, it was conceived for officers, and then it opened up to enlisted men.
For bravery, it's quite a broad phrase. Did they ever try to put a category for a criteria? For to be awarded one for bravery?
Yeah, it was considered above and beyond the call of duty, something extraordinary that wasn't part of normal duties. Someone who just went above and beyond the call of duty.
So we're going to be looking at African Americans in the Second World War who are awarded the Medal of Honor. I was going to ask about their position in the army. Before we get to the Medal of Honor bit, because I think this in itself is really fascinating. Now, how segregated was the army in 1939? Because I was under the impression during the First World War it's not a segregated institution, but I might be completely wrong on all accounts.
Right, it was a segregated army in the First World War. There were black soldiers in black units in the First World War, but they were mainly pushed off to fight with the French, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It says a lot about the status of how they felt African Americans were and the French.
Yeah, I mean, it's very odd because you'll see black American soldiers with the French helmet on in French units. That's a quandary. But black soldiers did fight in units like the Harlem Hellfighters and other units, and but it remained a segregated army.
And when we say segregated, how are they segregating the army? That's what I meant to say. So you get no mixed units. Is there a differentiation in the jobs that they're given?
Somewhat. You're talking about the First World War or the Second?
Well, I was moving by 39.
during the Second World War, they were segregated into more service units in rear echelon positions, like truck drivers and part of the engineers, supplies and things like that. They were not in combat roles, per se, in the early part of the war. They were in the war, but more behind the scenes. And they trained for a long time before they were allowed into their combat roles. The main catalyst for bringing black soldiers into combat was the Battle of the Bulge, actually, when there was a lot of attrition of white soldiers wounded and killed, and they simply had no one left to fill these rifle companies. So Eisenhower issued a letter in late December 1944 inviting black soldiers to train for infantry roles. And they got an overwhelming number of applicants. They got close to 5,000 African-American soldiers to apply, but they had to cut it off at about 2,500. So there was enthusiasm to go on the front lines and fight.
Was there any reason why they decided to not give them combat roles or not expect them to be in combat roles at the start of the war? If some had seen combat with the French during the First World War, it shows less of a barrier in the First World War to put them to put African Americans into action than if in 1939 into 40, 41, 42, they're not expecting African Americans to be in a combat role. Is there any did they have an overt reason or why, or was it just quietly just?
There was a reason why, and I asked myself that question because there had to be a sea change to cause that to happen, and it was due in large part to a 1925 Army War College report. I'll use the term Negro soldiers in combat. I don't mean anything by that term. I'm just using the term from that time. For black soldiers in combat, it was a scathing report, a racist report from the Army War College in 1925 about the ability of black soldiers to perform in combat roles. It basically said they weren't smart enough. They ran at the first sign of trouble. They weren't reliable, on and on and on. And that was a report that was issued in 1925. And that colored the Army, the whole military's opinion about the potential service of black soldiers in combat during World War II. It was sort of an unspoken given that you didn't want a black soldier beside you in your foxhole because you couldn't trust them. And of course, that's not the truth. But that was the prevailing attitude regarding black soldiers. It was due to that report. That's ridiculous report.
I hadn't quite realised that. I just was aware that something had changed in the interwar years to change the military's attitude somehow. I hadn't realised I hadn't realised it was quite as overt as an official report. I'd sort of assumed it was just an inherent racism that they'd quietly decided it without ever actually writing it down. It almost makes it worse to have written it down.
Yep. And because it came from the Army. Yeah, it came from the Army War College. Yeah.
So if we're looking at African American units, do they have their own officers, or are they white officers? How is there a ceiling to their leadership, African American leadership?
Well, the way it was structured, I mentioned the letter from Eisenhower inviting black soldiers into combat. It was initially recommended to have a one-for-one replacement in white rifle companies, of black soldiers joining white rifle companies and just, being a body. But that was shut down because that was too much integration. So they decided on a compromise to have what they called a fifth platoon, a fifth rifle company of all black soldiers, but they were commanded by white officers. So there were no very few. I'll say very, very few black officers. And black officers were only in certain units. Like one of our Medal of Honor recipients, Charles Thomas, served in the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. And that battalion was created in 1943. But when it was created, they made a rule that black officers could command a company. So they were creeping towards integration. And that's the only reason that he became a lieutenant in the Tank Destroyer Battalion, because that was a new rule. But in rifle companies, black soldiers were commanded by all white officers.
Could they provide their own NCOs?
They could, yeah. Sergeants, yes. Yes, they rose through the ranks.
Did that cause problems, having white officers, or did they suddenly learn that actually people are people and just got on with it?
There was not much respect on either side, but the black soldiers knew what they had to do. I mean, they knew they had a job to do, and they just did it. One of our Medal of Honor recipients, Vernon Baker, served in the 92nd. His company commander was wounded by a mortar attack, and he had to assume the role of company commander of that company. He served in it for months, but he knew, and he admitted, that they would never elevate him to the officer in charge of the company, and but he performed all the duties of an officer of that company.
You could do the job, but you're not having the title.
Right, and they did bring in. He served in Italy. They brought in 3 new white officers, and the white captain that took over his company had no combat experience, none.
Now, is it Vernon Baker's CO with no combat experience that actually is the one that breaks down and disappears in the middle of the combat, leaving Vernon Baker to clear the mountain strongholds with his men single-handedly?
Yes, that's exactly the one. Yeah.
Before we get to the Medal of Honor, I was going to say so coming out, because we were starting to allude to the fact that they are in combat roles, important combat roles, but there was no African American Medal of Honor winners, recipients. I'm not sure if you should use the word winners, but recipients at the end of the Second World War.
It's a faux pas. I know it's a faux pas to call Medal of Honor recipients winners, and I know that from historians, and I don't when I'm in interviews like this. But for the book is more broadly marketed, so the word winners applies because people just don't think twice about that word. But people who are military historians and people who are interested in the subject say that Medal of Honor, people who have received the Medal of Honor, they're awarded the Medal of Honor, or they're a recipient. They're never a winner. So I want to let people know that I know the difference.
Well, I think the important thing is, considering how many handed out posthumously, it's hard to say you've won.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah,
that you're a recipient for the service that you've done. So was the American Army aware that it hadn't handed out any Medal of Honors? There was no Medal of Honor recipients from African American backgrounds. They
were fully aware of that, and what's surprising is in the next conflict, the Korean War, African Americans were awarded the Medal of Honor right away. There were several that received the Medal of Honor and were awarded the Medal of Honor during Korea while the conflict was still going on. There was no delay. As the years advanced into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, late 80s, it was realized that up until the late 80s, there were no recipients, black Medal of Honor recipients in World War I. So there was a campaign to discover why. And by the late 90s, there were 2 that were recognized as deserving of the award, and one was awarded in the early 90s, and a second soldier received his award in 2015 for World War I. But the first soldier that received his award started the ball rolling with the Army to question why, not only why no African Americans had received the award in World War I, but why no African Americans had received the award for their service in World War II. So congressmen in the United States from New York pushed the Department of Defense to look into it. And a study was commissioned in 1993 to look into why no deserving Black Americans had received the Medal of Honor.
I mean, how did they go about the process? Are they literally just going through combat reports, or do they cherry pick the highest medals that people had received and trying to read through the citations and the combat reports? And
they didn't have time to go through all the combat reports, but the criteria they used was the second highest medal for honor, for bravery, gallantry in America is the Distinguished Service Cross. And they used that as a criteria to elevate Black soldiers who had received the Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor. And they had found, in their initial investigation, they had found 6, and then they found 3 more Black soldiers from World War II who had earned that. So it was a total of 9. So all the recipients, except for one, had received the Distinguished Service Cross, and that one soldier who didn't receive the Distinguished Service Cross was Reuben Rivers. He had received the Silver Star in his time in combat.
Is it Reuben Rivers who's senior officer who was holding out for him to get the Medal of Honor?
Yeah, the reason his commanding officer, Captain David Williams, the reason that Reuben Rivers was elevated to the Medal of Honor was because his commander didn't quit. Most white officers in World War II desired to submit their deserving Black soldiers for the Medal of Honor, but it was an unspoken rule that was discovered in this study that no Black soldiers would be recommended for the highest honor, the Medal of Honor. So they had to settle for submitting them for the Distinguished Service Cross. But Captain David Williams, who commanded the 761st Tank Battalion and Company A, Reuben Rivers was one of his tank commanders. He didn't want to settle for that. Williams wanted to submit Rivers for the Medal of Honor, and he had submitted a written report for that, and he didn't want to settle, and he didn't settle. And he fought for over 50 years to see that Reuben received his award. And he worked closely with the Shaw University study, with the people that were doing that study, and he supplied photographs of Rivers and battle reports and after-action reports, and he lobbied for Rivers to receive the award. And they mention in their final report, which is over 200 pages long, that although he was not a Medal of Honor recipient, his role in his unit is deserving of the Medal of Honor. So Captain Williams did not give up. And in an interview at the Medal of Honor ceremony in 1997, he gave an interview to the Baltimore Sun that said, I'm almost quoting here, he said, "God can take me now, the deed is done. Rivers has received his Medal of Honor."
It's nice that, so many men up to a point their deeds get forgotten, but there's someone out there still batting for Reuben Rivers after all that time, saying, no. Look at what this guy has done. Look, this is what he deserves. This is what he deserves. Do you want to tell us about what Reuben Rivers did to impress Captain Williams? Who was Reuben Rivers? What's his background?
Rivers was from Tecumseh, Oklahoma, which is essentially Indian territory, and he was part Cherokee Indian. He joined the 761st, 1942, I believe it was, not 1940, yeah, or maybe early 43. He served in Company A. He rose to the rank of a sergeant. He trained at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, which is where the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne first started. Camp Claiborne was a bastion of good old boys Southerners. And the 761st and the 758th, I believe was the other tank, all-black tank unit, were relegated to the back of the camp. It was a beautiful camp, but the black soldiers were given tents next to the sewage treatment plant in a former swamp. So that's where they had to live during their training, with the stench of the sewage treatment plant right next to them.
It's horrendous because all these training facilities seem to be in the south.
Yeah, the majority are. Yeah, Texas.
Which is kind of almost, you're just building on a problem that the Army's already got when you're sending your African-American troops.
I agree with that. There was a feeling in the Army that the Southerners could handle the quote-unquote Negroes. And I don't want to say Negroes. It's such a terrible word to say today. People are offended by it, and I agree with that. But that was the prevailing attitude, that the Southerners could handle them. That's why they were shipped to the South. An anomaly is Fort Huachuca in Arizona, where Vernon Baker trained. The majority of soldiers there eventually became the 93rd that served in the Pacific, but he became part of the 92nd that went to Italy. But yeah, that was the attitude.
Yeah. So yes, anyway, I interrupt you. Reuben Rivers.
Yeah.
What does he do to? Where's his background? Where's he come from? How does he? What does he do to impress Captain Williams?
Yeah, he grew up on a tenant farm in Oklahoma, a hardscrabble tenant farm in Tecumseh, Oklahoma. He got to Camp Claiborne and was trained in Company A, and he was just fearless and stoic. Williams described him as stoic. He was just unflappable, and he rose to become a sergeant. He went over to England and trained in England and got on the Sherman tanks. Initially, they didn't have the Shermans; they had the other tank, the Stuarts, yes. And then he became a tank commander in Europe and commanded 2 tanks. He was fearless. What he did to receive the Silver Star is on their first mission, they were supporting the infantry, and the infantry were attacked by Germans that were hidden off to the side on a road, and the road that they were traveling on was mined. It was mined by a huge tree trunk with mines embedded in the tree trunk, which stopped the armored column from advancing, Williams' company from advancing. So Reuben motored past. He was behind Williams' tank, and he went around Williams' tank and went to the front of the line and attached his Sherman's tow line onto this tree trunk, and under fire. They were under fire. He was under mortar and small arms fire during this, but he jumped out, put his Sherman's tow line around this tree trunk and pulled it off the road. So they were trapped before that. So he pulled it off the road, and Williams kind of watched it in disbelief, his bravery. And the column could advance now out of the ambush, out of the trap. He received the Silver Star for that. And he became Williams' fearless fighter from Oklahoma. And he led their company then further into the Siegfried, past the Siegfried line. And he took out a Tiger tank with 2 shots. And their role was just to keep advancing into these German-occupied towns. His tank, Reuben's tank, was in the lead. I can't remember the town they'd entered, but his tank went over a railroad crossing and there was a hidden teller mine in the tracks, and his tank hit the teller mine, and the tracks were blown off, and his tank was spun around, and Reuben was injured, badly injured in the leg, a gash right up his thigh, and with his knee. He got out of the tank, and the medic came up, and Williams assumed that Rivers would evacuate behind the lines, but he refused. Rivers refused to evacuate. He said, "You're going to need me," and he got bandaged up. He refused the morphine, and hobbled into another tank, and told the tanker who was commanding that tank to get out. He'd take over. So Williams watched him as he hobbled over to another tank. The other tanker got out, and he got in. And Williams said, "Okay, are you sure you're okay?" And Rivers insisted, "Yes, I'm okay. Let's go." So he kept going. And as they advanced farther and farther, into German-occupied towns, his legs started to really develop infection, and the medic was called again. Rivers didn't admit that he was in pain, but the medic came out and determined that he had gangrene setting into his leg. Captain Williams said, "Look, Rivers, you've received the Silver Star. You've done your duty. It's time to go back home." And they tried to convince him, he was out of the war. He'd done his duty. And he said, "No, you're going to need me." No, he said, "We'll be through this in a couple days, and then I'll take care of it." He convinced Captain Williams that he wasn't going anywhere. So Williams said, "The 11th Panzer Division is waiting for us across this river that we have to cross. Once we get over there, there's no going back. I can't send you back. This is the last opportunity." So he said, "I know." And they crossed over into the town, and Rivers was in the lead with his tank, and he spied two German tank destroyers, the 7mm tank destroyers. And he said on the radio, "I see him, I'm going to fight him." That was his last transmission. And he maneuvered his tank, his Sherman, into fire upon those tank destroyers the Germans had positioned, but they got off their shots first. And one 75mm shell blasted the Rivers tank and split it in two, and another one followed. And he was killed instantly by the German tank destroyers. And because of all the smoke and confusion, Williams didn't know that had happened. The radio just went dead, and his medic had to inform him that Rivers had been killed. So that was the bravery that Rivers demonstrated.
It's an amazing stoicism to keep buggering on with such must have been a horrendous leg wound, and determination to remain. Clearly he thought himself more useful to his men in the field than if he was in hospital, and he was doing more good there. Absolutely incredible story. And it's incredible that, as you said, Captain Williams kept battling on, holding on for all that time to see he gets the Medal of Honor. Because the other Medal of Honor winner and they're all absolutely incredible stories. John Fox was the other one, who was the forward artillery observer, isn't he? Who calls down the artillery eventually onto his own position, and they say, "Are you sure?" He says, "Yes, the Germans are here on me," and he directs it. What was amazing was, I hadn't really thought about this, but he's directing the artillery, saying, no, you've missed me. No, this way, that way. And he literally calls it down upon himself. But then his Distinguished Service Cross gets blocked, doesn't it? General Armand, is it? Overtly blocks his.
Yeah, Ned Almond blocked his. He had gotten a report about what John Fox had done at Soma Colonia. Ned Almond was an avowed racist. He had made comments that showed he was a racist, and he blocked Fox getting his Distinguished Service Cross for that action. And it was not until a writer, Hardin Hargrove, really did an investigation and pushed to have that Fox's actions looked at, and the Army agreed that he deserved the Distinguished Service Cross, and that was awarded in 1982.
It's amazing they keep turning up almost so late. That's not even from a large government initiative. There's still people out there batting for these medals. That was a bit, but the one I wanted to ask you about, because not necessarily directly what he did, because what he did was remarkable. Because it's what he did before the war. Just makes, before we started, we said this. If you made this into a film, you'd think it was fictitious. Is Edward Carter, who has just if his life stopped in 1939, he would have had a remarkable life. So what's Edward Carter's background before the war?
Sergeant Edward Carter grew up in outside the United States. His father and mother were missionaries. His mother was Anglo-Indian, part Indian, and they lived in Calcutta for a time. And they moved to Shanghai in the early 1900s. Carter's father was a minister, a reverend, but a very strict father. And Edward felt like he was under his thumb, literally. And he wanted to get away from his domineering father. He trained at the Shanghai Military Academy. That was his school, was the military academy in Shanghai. And Shanghai at this time was, in the mid and late 1930s, was a cosmopolitan melting pot city of missionaries and mercenaries, as I say. And they weren't experiencing the global Great Depression that everyone else was. And Shanghai was very wealthy. And the Japanese had their sights set on, conquering Shanghai and, bringing it into the Japanese Empire. And the Japanese launched an attack with aircraft carriers and targeted the international settlement in Shanghai. Edward Carter, took this as his opportunity to get away and from his father. And what he did was he joined the Chinese 19th Army that were fighting the Japanese invaders. He was accepted as an African-American fighter on the line, in the trenches. And he performed so fearlessly in his role that his commander put in a promotion to elevate him to lieutenant. And during this whole time, of course, his family was searching frantically for him. And his father arrived at the headquarters of the 19th Army and discovered that he had heard a rumor that his son had joined the army, but he didn't believe it. So he went to the 19th Army that was guarding that area of Shanghai, the transport district, and he said yes. That the commander told him that yes, his son was in the military and was performing extraordinarily well, and that he should be very proud of his son, and that they're elevating him to lieutenant, and he was going to fight under Chiang Kai-shek. And his father said, he's only 15, he's underage, you can't keep him. So they were shocked. So they pulled Eddie back into the family, and he returned with his tail between his legs and returned to school at the Shanghai Military Academy. That kind of set the tone. And later in the 1930s, which is interesting, the Italians attacked North Africa, Abyssinia, I believe. Eddie thought that was another opportunity to get away. So he went to the U.S. Embassy in Shanghai and asked if he could join the Italians in in the fight there. And they denied him because they said, America is not involved with this war. You can't join them. But they did acquiesce, and they said that we can get you into the Merchant Marines. Eddie went back and told his family that he was joining Merchant Marines. And his father at this time knew that he couldn't stop his son, Reverend Carter, so he didn't put up a fight. And he joined the Merchant Marines for several years. And then he served for, I'm not sure if it was 1 year or 2 years, but he returned to Los Angeles after his tour of duty. And he was surprised in Los Angeles to find that the world was experiencing a Great Depression that he knew nothing about. And he returned to Los Angeles where he was born, and there was no work, especially no work for Black Americans. So he had been reading in Life magazine all about the conflict in Spain. Hemingway, of course, had been writing about it, playing it up as, an idealistic conflict that we should support. And he decided to get on a ship and go over to Spain and join the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and fight against the Franco's forces. He was the only one essentially in his unit that had any combat experience. His commander didn't even have any combat experience. He was an ROTC graduate from Stanford, but they were all idealistic Americans serving in this brigade for freedom, and he served in that role. And I'll mention one action. He was selected by his commander to lead a patrol there were Germans involved with this conflict on the side of Franco, and he led a patrol against a German outpost, and they didn't really know where they were going, and they went up over this hill and came down the other side, and the Germans were hidden and ambushed them, and everyone in his patrol of 12 was killed except him. He was shot. He was shot in the back of his foot, and he hobbled back to the brigade and continued to serve. But that was his first action in the Spanish Civil War.
Which makes you wonder, when he rolls up in the American Army in 1941, if they asked him if he had any combat experience, or did he even bother telling them? Because it's a tremendous amount of experience he's had in the world before he gets to the American Army.
Yeah, by the time he got to Fort Benning in 1942, and he showed what he could do on the range as a marksman, they were floored. He was even written up in the camp newspaper. Well, that he was such an incredible shot, and he had such experience in the Spanish Civil War, and he's an amazing soldier, and still with that coverage that he was an amazing shot, and he had all this experience as an international soldier, essentially a mercenary. They assigned him to a service company. He rose in rank to sergeant, but they didn't allow him to carry a weapon. They didn't want him fighting on the line. And as I mentioned earlier, he was one of the soldiers, black soldiers, who joined, based on Eisenhower's letter, the training for combat in rifle companies. And they told him that he had risen to the rank of sergeant. They told him that if he joined, the training for a rifle company, he would be demoted in rank, back down to private. And I'm not sure what level of sergeant he was at that time, but he agreed. He said, "Yeah, I'll go back down to private to fight in combat." So he took it a motion to carry a weapon again.
He's married as well, isn't he, at this point? It's not as if he's a single chap.
Yeah, he got married when he returned from the Spanish Civil War back to Los Angeles. He met a woman, Mildred, I don't remember her last name.
He's still putting himself on the line, more than willing to go out there and...
Yeah, that's what he knew. He knew how to be a soldier, and that was the life he knew. And he had 2 sons, and his wife Mildred, actually, when he went into basic at Fort Benning, she moved into a house there outside Fort Benning, Georgia, and lived there while he was training. And then when he went off to war, he was in a quartermaster company. When he went off to war, she returned with the boys to Los Angeles.
And he spoke, am I right, so he spoke 4 languages. He spoke Indian, he spoke Indian, German, English and Cantonese?
Yes, yeah, he spoke 4 languages. He trained...
It's just remarkable. What did he do to win his Medal of Honor? I didn't know, win his Medal of Honor. Receive his Medal of Honor.
What he did to receive his Medal of Honor was he was serving with the 12th Armored Division, entering Germany in early 1945. They were going into unscouted territory when they were part of essentially a Patton's mystery division. They called it a mystery division because they removed their unit patches and painted over all their trucks and tanks, all the unit markings. They didn't want the Germans to know that the 12th Armored was entering Germany. So he was part of the mystery division, 12th Armored Division, and they were going into unscouted territory. They were traveling down the road in Germany, entering Germany, and at any point they could be ambushed from Germans on the road. And that's exactly what happened. They were ambushed. His patrol was ambushed, entering, I don't remember the town in Germany, but they were close to a town, and they were ambushed by an 88 and a machine gun nest, Germans, hidden in a warehouse off to the side of the road that ambushed their column. And Sergeant Carter volunteered to lead a patrol of men to take the 88 and machine gun nest out. Well, the 2 men that ventured, from the road with him were killed. He was shot 9 times trying to reach this warehouse. When he fell down, he raised his canteen to his mouth, and the canteen was shot out of his hand because a bullet went through his hand and shot the canteen out of his hand. He laid down there alive, and he knew that the Germans would go out looking for him. He still had his trusted Tommy gun, Thompson submachine gun, which was his weapon of choice, his favorite weapon. And he waited, and he planned his move, and they sent out, I believe it was 8 soldiers in a patrol to go find him, because he had gotten so close to the German position, and he had practiced his move. He knew what he was going to do, and when he felt the Germans were getting close enough, and one of them shouted in German, "American," he put his rifle to the ground, raised himself up, and shot 6 of them dead. And the other 2 were in shock, the other 2 Germans. And they raised their hands in surrender. And what he did was, mind you, he's wounded 9 times. He pulled 1 German in front of him and 1 behind him and walked backwards 150 yards to the road with these Germans, gripped to his body, and reached, his unit that was still on the road under cover. And his men, as well as the Germans, watched him in awe, get back to his position. And his commander said, his commander was Floyd Vanderhoef, and he said, "That's incredible. All right, get yourself, back behind the lines, get yourself taken care of." I mean, he was a mess, bloody mess. And he said, "No, these Germans have intelligence that we need." And he started to interrogate them. Actually, they found a high spot which overlooked the town they were approaching. And he interrogated these Germans in German because he knew German from growing up in China and learning it at Shanghai Military Academy. And he was able to interrogate them and find out where the hidden, machine gun nests were and snipers were. And these Germans gave up that information. And he was able to exact the information they needed. Then he said, I'll evacuate.
It's just an incredible story. The sad, amazing thing about all this is he actually tries to remain in the army after the war, and he's refused re-enlistment, which just sounds unbelievable considering his US war service, never mind his pre-war service. So why did the American army not want him after 1949? Because obviously his career's looming.
He rejoined the army when he got back to the States. Because civilian life was very tough. There's still discrimination, obviously, in the country. He tried to get a VA loan to start a small business. It was refused. So he decided to rejoin the Army in 1946. And he ended up training on loan to the California National Guard. Then he was assigned to Fort Lewis, Washington, in a military police unit. And he was doing very well. People respected him greatly. When he tried to enlist in 1949, it was denied, which came as a shock to him. And what he didn't know is because of his service in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, who were considered communists by the American government, he was denied re-enlistment because of his suspected communist ties. He was in shock because he wasn't a communist. He appealed to the Pentagon. He decided to fight it, and he traveled to Washington to ask for a meeting with Omar Bradley, and he didn't get a meeting. He asked to speak with the Army intelligence. No one gave him a meeting, so he returned to Washington without work, without re-enlistment. Eventually enlisted the ACLU to try to fight his case. They were unsuccessful. He had to work at a tire factory, vulcanizing rubber, and never was able to rejoin the Army. And his health deteriorated. He had smoked. He was a smoker. He developed cancer, and he died in 1963, late January, only in his 40s. So he was never able to re-enlist in the Army. But obviously everything changed.
All he ever seemed to wanted to do was be in somebody's army. It's amazing he didn't find another army to be in.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
It's so pragmatic. I wonder if those that survived, do we know how those who survived the war and saw combat, African Americans, did they feel they'd done anything for civil rights, being accepted into frontline combat roles?
Yeah, there was a catalyst at the beginning of the war, 1942, January 1942. There was a letter written by a young black American, James G. Thompson, to the Pittsburgh Courier, and it was sort of an op-ed. He wrote a letter to the Pittsburgh Courier, which was a black newspaper, saying, if I'm to serve in the military, answer my country's call, when I return home, will I still be half an American? His letter became the catalyst for the WWII campaign, which was victory abroad and victory at home. So this was the catalyst for young black Americans to know that to believe that if they served their country in the war, they would come back to, and done their duty, they would come back to equality at home. And that was what motivated black Americans in the services. That, okay, now we've suffered under this prejudice and racism all our lives, but now here's an opportunity that if we do our duty, when we come back, it's all going to be changed. We will have proven ourselves. And unfortunately, of course, that was not the case. The black veterans from World War II returned home. to the same prejudice and racism that they experienced before the war. One black soldier that was in my Wearith 11 film, he was in the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, and he returned home to Alabama and had to go to Washington. He lived in New Jersey, and he had survived a prisoner of war camp and fought during the Battle of the Bulge. And when he got on a train in Alabama, they told him to get to the back of the train. They weren't allowed to sit in the rail cars. He had to ride in the restroom all the way from Alabama to Washington, D.C. He had to stand in the restroom. That's an example of how black soldiers were treated when they returned home.
I don't think we're out of time to get to Vernon Baker, but it's Vernon Baker actually he does retrospectively receive the Medal of Honor, but am I right in saying he becomes the first black commanding officer of a white unit after the war? Have I got that right?
Yes, in Italy. When he came back from Italy after World War II, like Sergeant Carter, civilian life didn't agree with him. So he decided to re-up, and he joined the 82nd Airborne, and he jumped out of airplanes. And then he went to...
Did he admit to not liking heights?
Yeah, he didn't like heights. Yeah. He jumped out of airplanes. And I believe it was in Korea that he commanded... he was elevated and commanded a white company. And he received a lot of flack for that. But he served in the military till Vietnam. He actually left, retired during the Vietnam War.
His experience would have been interesting to reflect upon, because the changes no doubt he'll have seen from when he went in the early 40s through to whatever it is, 68. He really has seen the change in the military.
Right. And he said that one of the major reasons that he left was that, the drugs and everything that was happening, and in the military just wasn't safe. It wasn't worth it anymore.
Were many of the when they I forgot which year it is. Is it 96 that they looked? It's Bill Clinton who awards these Medal of Honors. Are any of them left alive?
Yeah, Vernon Baker was, and it was mid-January 1997, and Vernon Baker was the only recipient that was left alive and accepted the award. They all families of the other 6 received their awards, but he accepted it, and he gave a nod to the other 6, and said, job well done, guys."
Medal of, are they still looking for potential Medal of Honor winners? I don't know. Is there an active process of going through?
Yes,
citations, and
there are 2 that I know of, 2 black soldiers from World War II that have online petitions right now for recognition for the Medal of Honor, and one of them is Waverly Woodson, who served on D-Day as a medic and treated over 200 soldiers on D-Day as a medic. And it was documented that he treated that number. He was up for 30 hours straight treating the wounded, Waverly Woodson. And the second gentleman is Dory Miller, who served in the Pacific and was on the West Virginia during the Pearl Harbor attack. And he was a messman's mate, 3rd class. And one of the gunners on his ship was killed, and he jumped on the 50 caliber machine gun, never having shot it in his life, and it was estimated he shot down 3 to 4 planes from the West Virginia. What's interesting about that ship and that action is the commanding officer of that ship was carried off at the start of the attack, gravely wounded, and his commanding officer received the Medal of Honor. And Dory Miller did receive the Navy Cross, I believe, and there's a picture of him receiving the Navy Cross. But it's they're pushing for him to receive the Medal of Honor as well.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye out for if those are awarded, and perhaps have you back to share some of the other Medal of Honor recipients' stories. Loyal listener, if you're interested in reading the deeds these men undertook to be put forward for the Medal of Honor, and each story is remarkable, Robert's book is Immortal Valor, the Black Medal of Honor winners of World War II. Well, that's it for this episode. I think we're back in the Pacific next time out, perhaps looking at marine pilots. But until then, I'm Angus Wallace, and thanks for listening.